wow.
Wow is right.
Like, wow. And I'm saying, wow, 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 right? So, wow. I'm really blown away.
Me too.
So we've had it, you know, we've got somebody from government, and we've got somebody from business and finance, and we've got somebody right on the, you know, the edge of, my book was, well, my book was Lessons from the Edge, so I always think of entrepreneurs on the edge, so, you know, Tanya's definitely on the edge of everything. So we're really quite fortunate to have these resources here this evening. I thought I would kick off our sort of open discussion just with a few questions, and just to get some feedback. You've answered some of my questions. I was going to ask you what your definition of it is, social entrepreneurship, but I think we've covered that. But you know, the one thing that strikes me is that I've just seen passion, like 1, 2, 3, passion, right?
We love our work.
So what do you think it is that social innovators, social entrepreneurs have in common? I mean, obviously they have passion, but what are the other characteristics that, you know, you need? Because often when I do my little speeches of lessons from the edge, and people ask me, you know, what do all great entrepreneurs have in common? And I'm just wondering whether they're the same characteristics as make for successful social entrepreneurs.
You're looking at me, Jeff, but any of us
Well,
can
I
answer.
want you all to comment.
Okay. Well, I don't mind commenting, because I wrote an article about it lately that it got quite a bit of readership, and I think the answer is rage. Right? I really do. I've thought about it long and
Is this a
hard.
therapy?
Yeah, well, I think it is. It's like, okay, you know, you get to this thing and you're like, okay, how am I going to spend my life? Where's my passion, right? Where's the thing that gets me up and wakes me up and motivates me? And a lot of people are blessed with having the opportunity to simply be impactful. And that is amazing, and I love it. But I think the social entrepreneur is a little bit angry about something, right? For me, and justice, it's a sense of justice, of fairness, of you know, inefficiency, of waste. Like you see something and there's this fire that burns. And I think that this fire that burns inside you, which really informs how to direct your energy. Like, how do you pick your passion? How do you move it forward? Well, pick the thing that pisses you off the most. Because that's the thing that's going to keep you going. Because this is hard work. And so, personally, I say tap into the rage.
I'm going to take the opposite, although compatible view, which is tap into the happiness. This stuff, if you do it well, if you make a community better, even if you help one person, it feels awfully good. And that's always why, what motivated me to go into public service at a time when people were looking, you know, raising one eyebrow and saying, can government do anything? I always thought government could do everything. And we want to, I think, get that sense of helping, fulfilling, creating, all of those things, but we do it from different places. I'm one of those people who feels I can do that from government. Now, I've started social enterprises too, and that felt really good. And they're successful now, and I've left them alone to proceed on their own basis. But I keep coming back to government. I think you, Bill, in how you address system change, and you, Tanya, in how you take on the world. I mean, you may be motivated by a different form of passion and do it from a different place.
And not that I have a lot to add, since I'd agree with all that, but coming at the middle, because I like to be just a accommodating sport, you know, I think the common thread is you got to find stuff that engages you, and whether the engagement comes from, you know, a sense of injustice, whether it comes from a sense that I really want to make the world a better place, and that engages, or even, I mean, where I would say there is a huge commonality with a traditional entrepreneur or a commercial entrepreneur. I mean, many people think that traditional entrepreneurs are driven by, well, I want to make a lot of money. I think that's the exception. I think they're driven by a sense of, I see something that isn't working, I've got a better solution, I am stubborn. I'm absolutely convinced my solution is better than that, and I am going to show you that I can do that. I mean, I think that's in some ways, and I think what drives, I mean, there's a commonality in the three of us on that, whatever, might be some of the primal motivations. And I think that's very common with a commercial entrepreneur too. I think it's a real minority of them that are driven by, this need to make money. They're more driven by, I see a better way, I know it's a better way, and I'm going to show you it's a better way.
Is there a bit of rebellion there, or, I mean, because you sound...
Only with me, really.
Both of you guys sound angry.
Well,
That's why I say,
looking
Jeff,
for happiness.
But I'll just say, I just think it is really interesting because, like, I love the whole rage, provocateur, rebellion persona. It's super fun. You can get away with a lot. But the thing that's interesting is it's about the transformation, right? When you feel that rage or that anger and you have that instinct to do something. When you're in that world of social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, social innovation, you have an opportunity to become happy in that pursuit. It's like a release, where you're like, you know what? Yeah, I get passionate because I care. And isn't it cool to care? Because we can do something about it. It's that sense of embracing the power of it's up to us, right? It's that power of agency and engagement and not feeling that it's out of your control. It's about, it is in your control. And so it's an extraordinarily empowering place.
One of the things that kind of bugs me, makes me mad.
Oh, good.
Is, I think our schools do a poor job of socializing kids to self-responsibility, like to be self-reliant. And, we're socialized to rely on institutions, government, schools, big companies. Do you have any thoughts on that? Feed my anger?
Well, I think talking about schools as a system, I mean, that's it's pretty individual. And
Teachers of philosophy.
well, yeah, I mean, different schools are going to provide different things, but I think we start to look at entrepreneurship as something we would teach at a very, very late stage in the education system. I mean, why can't kids in grades 1 and 2 start to learn how to apply those great ideas that they have? I mean, the lemonade stand could become a vehicle for social good if it's positioned the right way. But I think we start to teach entrepreneurship, or at least engage in that as a formal area of study, and mentorship, and internship, and all of those things at a too late a stage. I don't think we start early enough, and kids are so receptive. The other thing about social entrepreneurs, or all entrepreneurs, is they're really smart. It taps the very best thinking and the most imagination you can summon in a child as much as an adult. So, I mean, it's the imagination, it's the enthusiasm, and the creativity. That should start way younger.
I mean, what I would say to your point, Jeff, too, I mean, obviously could not agree more with what Helen's saying, but what you're getting at, I mean, it's become trendy now to talk about grit as part of, what's missing in curriculums. And you always worry about something that becomes trendy to talk about, because then, the whole point of it often gets missed. But I think grit is such a good word to describe, what, the social entrepreneurial journey is, what you need for it. You are constantly running into setbacks, and the setbacks are multitudinous in the sense of, they're not just business setbacks. They're, you run into regulatory frameworks that can't contemplate what you're doing. Whether
regularly.
Regularly, and so, and it does fuel some range of emotions, including anger, come to think of it, for me. If someone mentions CRA, then my blood pressure boils in my ear. I'm instantly, looking for alcohol, and those are all not necessarily good things. know, that sort of triggers us. But you need a resiliency. I think that's another word that's, you know, talked about in curriculums now, and grit. I mean, it would be good to equip our students not with, I mean, with trying to think about what creates those characteristics, because those are good things for us in life, period.
So I'm going to take a completely different tact on and get to your question about government, because I think it's interesting. So first of all, I'm the least educated person probably in the room. I have like barely a 3-year BA, and I was just happy to get out of high school. So I don't, you know, really, it's true. But the thing that I think is going on that's super interesting right now is that I think this movement and its empowerment and the power of the internet and the power that we're seeing around the power of crowds and citizen engagement is calling out a brokenness in our own understanding of the role of government. So I think there's a tension that's going on in our society in Canada right now, which is, you know, there's a whole group of our society who believes that government should be doing more. And then there's this other group in society that thinks that government should be doing way less. And the pressure on government is enormous. And so there's this sense of frustration as we're trying to find the new contract, the new social contract. What is the role that government should play? What's the role that business should play? What's the role that social entrepreneurs and these different parts of our society should play? So, you know, I hope we don't just take that sense of futility and blame it on education as being responsible for this. I think this movement is saying we have some pretty big fundamental tensions, maybe healthy, that are begging a new set of questions about what kind of role we want government to play, and can we get beyond left and right thinking to focus on solutions? And that's what social entrepreneurs are doing, is they're looking for how to not get caught in old baggage, but how to actually bring inspired new solutions that meet needs on both sides. So the power of social enterprise is about reconciling and starting a conversation between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. If nothing else, this movement is pushing us to think differently about whose responsibility these things are in our world. And I think it's a great conversation to have. I don't have the answers, but it's a super interesting conversation.
But just on that, if I can add something to that, I think one of the things that's important to us, and I think what's great about social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, social purpose business, is I think it can fit any ideology. So when you say left, right, we think we can spin this no matter who's in power to make sure that it works, and stay away from being associated with one or the other, be ready. And I think that's the beauty of some of this hybrid stuff, is I actually think that you have to put a little bit of a different spin depending on whether you're dealing with a leftist government or a rightist government. But
we can make our appeal both sides. We're there.
Yeah.
So I want to change directions a little bit because, you know, I heard the presentations. I was really sort of touched by them and felt the passion. But one thing that, I don't know, maybe I didn't hear it properly, but seemed a little bit skipped over was this whole notion of sustainability, which, you know, Bill, is your investment model, these new systems, because to me it doesn't sound as much like a venture capital firm as it does a management consulting firm. And, you know, I grew up in the real estate business, so I know how that works. So I'm just curious about this whole sustainability aspect and how, you know, I'm sick and tired of going to these balls and, you know, having to start all over again and try to be, you know, greenwashing and all the other cliches we've heard. How do we make these things sustainable? How do we make it work and live and breathe on its own and live beyond us as these passionate, crazy people?
Well, do you want to go? Go ahead. You're going to say it, Ron. You're going to.
It's one of you, it's not me.
Yeah, it's one of us.
Well, I mean, again, it's where our journey's been interesting, but we went from thinking, let's get sustainable social enterprises to, boy, this is tough. What if we can make this part of a business? I mean, part I left out, for instance, on our franchise loans in terms of our strategy is because we're saying, there are already sustainable organizations out there. You know, how do I add this into them? Because they're going to be around a long time. So interestingly enough, on our franchise loan portfolio, I hope we'll have an announcement in a few weeks that talks about how one of the large banks has acquired a bunch of our franchise loans. Because isn't it a little more interesting if a large bank has a loan product which is conditional on the implementation of a community hiring program than if its social capital partners has one? And isn't it more interesting if a large bank ties their interest rates to the number of community hires, which is what we do? As they hire more, their interest rates come down, so we tie our financial return to our social mission. Well, what if a bank had that kind of product? And how does this become the Trojan horse so that 5 or 10 years from now, it's as easy for any of us to invest in an affordable housing fund or a community bond or a microfinance fund when we phone up our investment advisor as it is a conventional mutual fund. And so we think a whole different take on this sustainability thing, which has flipped our model around. You're right, we are ironically really no longer a social finance company. It's sort of puzzling how that happened, given what we were doing. But we flipped the model around to say, boy, oh boy, if we can get this stuff in the hands of already sustainable organizations, we've solved the sustainability problem once and for all. And it's a different twist. I don't know if it'll work, but it's the way we're trying to think about that now.
So we're a $6.5–7 million company. We employ 4 to 5 staff. We've got 100,000 square feet under management, and we serve 500 organizations. We partner with
What's your EBITDA?
So I don't actually know because I've never been able to figure out what the hell that actually means. But I can tell you that we generate our own revenue. We are completely independent.
But are your revenue greater than your expenses?
Yes, they are. Yes. So absolutely, fundamentally, we broke even in our 4th year. And we have been able to be in the black, more or less, not last year, but other years. And growth is hard. So every time we grow, we go down into the red again, and then we build it up again. So no, we're completely self-sufficient social enterprise. We choose to partner with folks like Government of Ontario, with TD Bank, and Microsoft in those kinds of philanthropic partnerships in order to do more. And to be able to do more for our community and more for our members. But absolutely, what we've got is we are a tax-paying part of our economy, vibrantly creating employment and finding solutions in the regular economy. And so, you know, a legitimate part of our economic system. And we're not a registered charity, and so we're never holding rubber chicken dinners.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
Hello, my name's Allison. Been referred to a couple of times.
And you need a microphone.
And I need a microphone. I don't actually really need a microphone.
No, you
No, you just yell, you're doing good.
So 2 things. Number 1, so Tanya really clearly said, you know, her organization is not a charity, and there are some food banks which we don't want to be sustainable. We should be focused on that impact thing, which is getting rid of food banks, right? And we don't ever want to lose that. And I just really need to say, as much a fan and live and breathing social enterprise, it is not a panacea. It is not taking away the need for charity. And we have to think about all of this on that part of the continuum. So just didn't want to lose that.
Thank you. Does anybody else, I mean, I've been dominating here. I'd be more than happy to go ahead, Jack.
I'm on my 3rd startup right now, and I'm kind of losing steam on it for a couple of reasons. A, I feel the rage. I did not sleep at night. It's eating me up alive. And something very particular. My biggest problem is I'm an entrepreneur. I've had the rigor of building companies, and most of the people I've met who work in social entrepreneurship, quite bluntly, are flakes, and I haven't been able to have a decent conversation. And I'm kind of scared of entering this, of even contemplating entering this. So I just want to see, what's your advice for somebody who's come from the rigor of being an entrepreneur, moving into this? Where do I start?
Yeah, I agree. there's a lot of flakes out there for sure, right? And there's flakes, there's one category, and then there's the do-gooders that don't have a business model, right? And God bless them. We have a lot of capacity building to do, and I will say it over and over and over again. And you know, if I had a social entrepreneur for every person who wanted to be a social, you know what I mean? And look, this is hard work. It's a smaller community than we would like, of folks who are actually in the field doing that. Finding your allies and finding your partners is going to be critical. Come visit us at CSI. We'll find you a handful that you can take seriously. It's really tough, and finding folks that are in your sector is super hard too, right? Because there's different verticals that are at play. But look, I think, you know, finding people who believe in you is the number one most important thing. Whether they're from the for-profit, non-profit, social venture side, doesn't really matter. Finding people who believe in you and believe in your choices and the decisions that you make, those are the people who are going to be the most important to support your work. And then finding a community of folks is going to be a critical piece too. But mostly I think it's a community, but there's also an ecosystem approach. At CSI, what we really focus on is how do we create an ecosystem of different players so that you can pick off and test out who's real, who's not, who do I need to partner with, who can I avoid, and just get to town as quickly as possible. Because really, let's face it, social entrepreneur, any kind of entrepreneurship, it's a race, right? It's triage. We got to move quickly because we only have cash to last us so long before we've got to have a product to market. So that's the reality. And so finding people who you can, finding a community that you can access the resources that you need as quickly as possible is, I think, going to be the thing that helps you. And then if you meet people along the way, all the power to you.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, here I'm someone who's come from the private sector, so and I've been in this sector now for 12 years. I have no draw back to what I was doing before. There is plenty of opportunity for someone who comes from a more conventional business background to add value, find their way, find an entrepreneurial opportunity, and it's way more meaningful than what I was doing before. Not that I didn't like what I was doing before, but I have zero draw back to what I was doing. So despite the myriad of frustrations, despite the, whether it's the rage or the happiness or, somewhere in between, and there is plenty of frustration and plenty of challenges. I think it's sometimes not, I mean, I think in anything you do, you run into, I don't know, if they're flakes or whatever, but there is a need, I think, for people who've got a great business sense that comes with a good heart, and there is plenty of opportunity to find things that engage you in a way that you've never been engaged before. Okay.
Okay, I just have to do this because I'm tapping into my rage.
Yeah, that's right.
And some of you know a little bit of my story, but here's one of the questions I have for the panel. And to your point, so I ran a $60 million division. And I became a so-called social entrepreneur. Business was going great. We built it up. Went to 19 employees, 1.5 million in sales after 18 months, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I think is missing in the whole social enterprise conversation is I see a lot of startups, but not a lot of people progress very far beyond one or two or very small businesses. Once you have a big enough business and you are employing people and dealing with, in my case, 7 farms and things like that, what happens when the board of directors decides to take a change and say, this is really good, but we could do so much better if we actually turn this into a real business. And let's change the values, or let's go in another direction because now we've got some traction. So, and we built it on the backs of the idea that we're going to have this great social impact, but now we're going to make it even better.
Well, every business, whether it's profit or non-profit, has the same challenge, right? Because if once you take in outside investors, then and you take in an outside board, you lose control.
You lose control. So this is a normal entrepreneurship story, right? So my question, though, is that in social entrepreneurship, though, the impact is so much greater. In regular business, you lose money, people walk away, you know that, you hope not to lose money, but you live to see another day. When it's a social enterprise, and you're dealing with marginalized employees or trying to do something, the impact is much more significant, and in fact could be even more damaging. So one of the things I'd love to see happen in government or otherwise is to say, where are the consequences? If you're going to build a business on the idea of social benefit, when you take that away, shouldn't there be some consequence or some safeguards? So for example, I had a building, a factory. If the community didn't have enough money to buy it outright at that point in time and it went to other buyers instead, couldn't there have been some other way of trying to make that more attractive or try to facilitate that the community that benefited from that enterprise the most could put in a better bid? Of course, they couldn't exactly put in the best bid as it turns out. So I guess what I'm saying is I saw some fallout from this that I think was far worse than people around the table, including myself, losing money. And that's, I don't know how to say, maybe it's just the way it goes, but I just think in social enterprise, and I had another business before, I think it's different. So when it goes down in a much more impactful way. So.
I think just to echo and expand on what you started to say, this is where social enterprise is just like any enterprise, all enterprise. When you do take in other investors, they call the shots. And there is no, there's no charter, there's no magic, there's a contract or there's some kind of relationship that pre-exists, but things change. And there's nothing that can be regulated, there's nothing that can be changed. I think the thing that I've noticed a lot about social enterprises, the ones that are successful, are the partnership and the cohesion and the engagement with the community is based on trust. And if you don't trust, and what you talked about before, Tanya, about values, and if you don't share some values and you don't trust your partners to continue along the same lines as you were initially moving, then that just that's a business breakdown, and that's not particular to social enterprises.
True, but what about things like community interest corporations and CCC? I mean, that seems to me those legal formats were brought into place to mitigate.
So you had a certified B Corp.
Yeah.
Right. There would have been some charter that would have been necessary to follow. Otherwise you lose your status.
But I guess I've with 9 years now, I'm getting to the other side of the startup, right? I don't think I have got a compelling case anymore. And you know, it really calls into question one of the questions on your list, which was the for-profit versus nonprofit choice. And you know, again, I kind of have to bleed to learn. But you know, I think that the nonprofit model is undervalued in its current form. Let me be clear about this. When we went to go buy that building that Bill and so many others helped us to buy, we had so many offers from VCs and investors to take care of the little lady, right? Like, we'll just take care of you. Don't worry, darling, we'll buy the building for you, and you can buy it back from us at $8 million.
That didn't get your rage going.
Not at all, Bill. Oh, not at all. And what was really, really interesting is we could have sold the company, the nonprofit. We could have sold the nonprofit 3 times over to people that I spoke to, because we have a viable business, and they would have loved to take it over, hands down. And I've done that. I've sold a nonprofit to a for-profit. It was interesting, a long time ago, but interesting. So, and we got like 3.5 million for it, so it's not so bad. But the thing that is super interesting is this question of for-profit versus nonprofit is highly misunderstood in this field. And the nonprofit model does not allow for shareholders to take a profit, which means we are protecting the community benefit in that model. Inherently, the not-for-profit model says you can take loans, but you can't take equity. And of my 60 bondholders, they don't make decisions for me. They are investors, but they're not decision makers. I believe so much more now after being what I've been through in the last 4 years. I am actually more committed to the nonprofit model as the right legal form for social enterprise than ever before. And do you know why? Because when the rubber hits the fan, is that the right expression? Rubber hits the road? Or the shit hits the fan? Okay. Oops. You know what? I've seen so many for-profits go to the money and not the values. Over and over and over again. And so when all hell breaks loose, when you're a not-for-profit, your mission is the social mission. And that's the one that you have. And if you're a for-profit and you do well, people are going to be looking to maximize their returns because that is the nature of the model. And so I know
In
that.
fact, the directors have an obligation,
An
a fiduciary
obligation.
obligation to do what's in best interest of the corporation.
Right, and let me be clear too, right? The nonprofit model, our staff get paid well, we do great employment policies, we have incredible people that we serve. And so, you know, one of the questions that I think we really do have to, I think we've been relegating the nonprofit model as to being antiquated, and as somebody who's come to the other side of that, I just have to say there's some really great stuff in that nonprofit model.
I would just add, it's a complex question.
Sure is.
I do think these new corporate forms provide some measure of protection, you know, in terms of the B Corps and KICs, the community interest companies, et cetera, designed to help a little bit with the exact issue you brought up. We are a nonprofit, so Capital Partners, and as long as you're not trying to raise charitable dollars from individuals, I think it's a terrific structure because you have way more flexibility than you have as a charity. So as a charity with the charitable regulations, they are very limiting to many forms of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. And so I always think, I don't want structure to determine strategy, which I think can happen if you're a charity. It can happen a little bit if you're a for-profit with fiduciary duties that can, but I think they're mitigated somewhat by these new corporate forms. But I think increasingly, anyone in this field is going to have a multiple number of organizations. You know, you might want an arm that can raise charitable dollars from individuals. You may want a nonprofit that allows, you know, one of the things the nonprofit status allows us to do is go out and get pro bono help from companies, which has been a lot of the way we've added resources that we wouldn't be able to hire otherwise. But there are going to be times where the for-profit model makes sense underneath one of those. So it's sadly a complex minefield because our regulations don't easily contemplate these hybrid forms, and that's a challenge.
Just to interrupt, I hate to do this, but Helen has a previous engagement, so we're going to have to quickly thank her, because she's going to leave now. We're going to continue for another 5 minutes, but thank you so much.
We like one another.
Yeah, we should do.
You can never tell.
It was great to meet you. Thank you so much. Hope we can talk more.
It's so lovely meeting you. I'm going to chase you down. That's for those.
So I want to keep the momentum going, because one of the things that's been kind of concerning me is this whole question of metrics, right? You mentioned it earlier, Tanya, about you know, the analytics and understanding the data.
Before we shift gears, I've got a quick question, so I don't interrupt, but shifting gears slightly. What's a good resource to look at comparing nonprofit for profit? I'm working with someone right now to set up the company structure, and we're looking at it. Everyone's told me.
I'm a good resource. What you go see a good lawyer, and the other thing I would just add to that is that, you know, before you incorporate, you got to go through that sort of philosophical decision about what do you stand for, what are your values, because, you know, I think the issues are the same for for-profit entrepreneurial businesses as they are for nonprofit, in the sense that you need a vision, right? You need that leader who has a vision and a mission, and then you got to fill it in around it to decide, you know, what are those values that you stand for, and that's true in any business. And once you've got that, then you can build your structure around it, because there's lots of options, and you got to talk to somebody who understands that stuff, which is usually either a chartered accountant or a lawyer, or both.
But here's one thing I'll just add to that. lot of those decisions are formed by where you think you're going to get the capital fund from to get started. And that game is changing. And so that's all I'll say, right? Like the mission should inform the model, just like what Jeff is saying, but we've become very attached to this concept of startup capital, VC capital. We think that that's where the money's going to come from. And I will tell you that there are way more options for where that capital can come from than what we generally think about. And so it's just to say we are democratizing finance. The power of the crowd is upon us, my friends. And it's not just the crowd, it's the power of something like community bonds, which is a type of capitalization. I mean, I've watched as some of the most successful social entrepreneurs have gone the for-profit model. They raised the money, they raised the capital, then they read the fine print, they said, screw this, walked away. Amazing stories of people saying, hey, I'm losing control, I'm taking back the power of small, and I'm gonna do this through friends and family. So it's just to say, I think that there's been this VC bubble, this like magic, this whole magic potion thing, and that's not where we're seeing, I'm not seeing the kind of traction those initiatives, and I'll also say we're about to come out with a really killer report with our partnership with the crowdfunding platform. Did you know that, I forget the exact, I've got to nail these down, but crowdfunding has enabled financing tools to women like never before. 40% of the funding that is raised through crowdfunding goes to women entrepreneurs, whereas only 5% of VC capital goes to women. We're seeing this with minorities and this is as well. So this is just so interesting. I think the whole field of finance is in transition. It's super exciting and it's going to throw the entire legal framework thing on its head. Just saying.
Yeah, there's study more.
The only thing I'm not adding to that, which I think needs no addition. I think it is a very interesting subject, but just there are some academic papers out there. The Center for Social Enterprise of BC, I think, has put out something on the trade-offs between nonprofits, charity, etc. A guy named Richard Bridge has a bunch of things on it. Allison, you probably know some other logical sources to go to, but there are quite a number of papers that have been done on this specific issue. Doesn't change the advice of what you need. You need a good lawyer and accountant to keep you out of trouble. But there are places to look at. Just
So we only have about 4.5 minutes because apparently they might turn out the lights on us.
Yeah, it's okay.
So, but the one thing I'm really curious about is this whole question of metrics. How do we measure the success? I come from the for-profit world. I'm sort of the typical entrepreneur. Every deal I look at, I'm looking for returns and that sort of thing. Clearly, that's not the only measure for you. Obviously, it's got to be sustainable. But what are the kinds of things, and how do we measure it? And is there some standard? Or are there, best practices?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. And Shula will, we've got a couple of experts in the field around too, and I guess there will be a specific session on metrics, which some incredibly talented people will be participating in. But there's the attempt to get standards. There's this umbrella organization called GIN, which has a particular appeal to me. Any organization called GIN has got a lot of merit to it. But which is the Global Impact Investment Network. It is trying to crack the code on the measurement because there's so many different organizations taking individualized approaches on it. So trying to come up with something like the IRIS standard, so in terms of a standard reporting format for anyone in this field to try and get some uniformity around it. It's complicated, as you might guess, in terms of getting, but they're getting a whole bunch of signatories to agree to comply with the IRIS standards in terms of the way they develop it. People like Anshula are developing software around this whole impact measurement area to help organizations go through sort of a social return on investment kind of template and pick and choose kind of how they want to think about it and how they measure. So the field is beginning to emerge. It's beginning to be standardized. There's an understanding around the fact that there is a need to standardize, that the field can't take off without that standardization. We're still at pretty early stages in that, but there's some interesting organizations tackling it.
Jeff, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I hate to stop Bill and Tanya ever, because I think this conversation.
It's hard to do.
It is hard, and it's dangerous.